Amit Sharma had always lived his life with questions but without answers. Growing up in a small town in India, he was raised in a family where spirituality was deeply rooted in tradition. His father, a man of strong beliefs, often spoke of the afterlife, of the soul's journey beyond death. But to Amit, these were just stories, myths passed down through generations, too old and too distant to hold any real truth. He was a man of science, logic, and reason, a modern individual in an ancient land. Now at 35, Amit had come to accept the finality of life. Death, in his view, was the end, a cessation of everything. He had witnessed the death of his father a few years ago, and with it, his belief in any sort of spiritual continuation had been buried. His father's cremation, a sacred ritual in their Hindu culture, seemed to him a futile attempt to honor a memory rather than a meaningful way of sending the soul to another plane. Amit's life, though successful by many standards, had been marked by a sense of emptiness. He worked in an office job in the bustling city of Delhi, living in a modern apartment where distractions of technology and daily life kept his mind occupied. His wife, Priya, was a devout Hindu, regularly visiting the temple and participating in religious festivals. She would speak to him about the importance of faith and the soul's eternal journey, but Amit, with his rational mindset, never took her words seriously. At home, their differences in belief were a quiet undercurrent in their marriage. Priya's faith was a comfort to her, but to Amit, it felt like a concept he could never truly grasp. His brother, Arjun, shared his worldview, dismissing the teachings of their family as superstition. But their mother, Gita, who was deeply spiritual, would often challenge them with her firm belief in reincarnation and the endless cycle of life. Amit was content to live with his skepticism, but all of that would change in a way he could never have anticipated. And then, on an ordinary day, something extraordinary happened. Something that would lead him to question everything he had ever believed about death, the soul, and the very nature of existence. Before we dive deeper into this journey, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let us know where you're from in the comments below. I never imagined that my life could change so drastically. To be honest, I always thought I had it figured out. I was living what I believed was a full life. A good job, a wife who loved me, and a routine that kept me comfortable. But something inside me felt empty, like I was just going through the motions, existing without ever truly living. That feeling only grew stronger after my father passed away. He was the one who had always spoken so passionately about life after death, about the soul's eternal journey, but I couldn't bring myself to believe it. Death was the end. There was nothing more. I remember the day my father was cremated like it was yesterday. Priya had insisted we follow all the rituals, but I couldn't bring myself to participate fully. I stood to the side, watching the flames consume his body, and I couldn't help but think, is this really all there is? I couldn't help but feel disconnected, even from my own family. Priya would pray, seeking peace for my father's soul, but to me, it just felt like empty gestures. Arjun, my younger brother, was the same. We shared a bond in our skepticism, both dismissing our mother's belief in reincarnation and the afterlife as old superstition. We didn't need that stuff. We had science, logic, reason. Those were our guides, and that was enough. But life, in all its complexity, has a way of shaking you out of your comfort zone. One night, I had a moment that would shake me to my core, a moment that turned everything I thought I knew upside down. It happened after I was in a car accident. I wasn't badly injured, but it was serious enough to send me to the hospital. That night, lying in the sterile white room, I drifted into unconsciousness, and that's when it began. I don't even know how to describe it. The experience felt so real, so vivid, but at the same time, it was unlike anything I'd ever known. I found myself floating in darkness, no sound, no light, just an overwhelming sense of nothingness. But I wasn't afraid, at least not at first. I felt strangely calm. It was like I had stepped out of the world I knew, out of my own body. I wanted to scream, but no words came out. Instead, I was surrounded by a presence, something I couldn't see, but I could feel. A presence that somehow knew me, knew my thoughts. I began to hear voices, not words in the traditional sense, but a hum, a soft vibration that resonated in my chest. Then it came, a figure, bathed in light. I couldn't make out the details, but the feeling it radiated was undeniable. It was peace, it was warmth, it was love. A voice that wasn't a voice spoke to me, and I understood it as though it were my own thoughts, but clearer, more certain. Your beliefs are not the truth, the voice said. What you've known is not all there is. The words pierced me like a sword, though there was no fear, just a deep, profound sense of being seen, of being known. I wanted to argue, wanted to tell it that I knew the truth. There was nothing after this life. But I couldn't. Something inside me shifted, like the walls I had built around my understanding of the world were beginning to crumble. I was shown visions, glimpses of souls, drifting, lost, or at peace. I saw those who had been cremated, their souls, not gone as I had believed, but lingering in a space beyond what I had ever imagined. I saw people who were connected by invisible threads of love, compassion, and grace. And I knew, deep down, that I was seeing something real, something beyond human understanding. When I woke up, I felt disoriented, my mind racing with questions. I had been shaken to the very core of my beliefs, but there was still a part of me that couldn't accept it. How could I? How could someone like me, who had always prided myself on logic, on reason, believe in something so intangible? The experience stayed with me, though. I tried to push it away, tried to convince myself it was just a hallucination, but the feelings, the visions, they haunted me. And the more I thought about it, the more my worldview began to unravel. I was left with only one question. What if there's more to life than I could ever understand? What if my beliefs had been wrong all along? This experience didn't just change my perspective on death. It made me question everything I thought I knew about the world, about what happens to us after we die. The hardest part, though, was facing the possibility that I might have to change. I had to confront the fact that my whole life, my entire belief system, could be built on something I no longer trusted. I didn't know how to move forward, but one thing was clear. I couldn't go back to the way I had been. Something had shifted inside me, and now I had to figure out what to do with it. The days following the accident felt like I was walking through a fog. I was alive, but everything around me felt distant, disconnected. Priya noticed the change immediately. She could see it in my eyes. Something was different, but I couldn't put it into words. She tried to talk to me about it, asking if I was okay, if I needed to talk, but I didn't know how to explain what had happened. How could I? How could I explain that I'd seen souls, that I felt like my entire understanding of life had been shattered when I didn't even understand it myself? I kept replaying the experience in my head, trying to make sense of it. The vision of the souls, some peaceful, some lost, stayed with me. I couldn't help but wonder about the souls of those who were cremated. My father's cremation had always felt like an end, like his soul was gone. But now I wasn't so sure. Could it be that those who are cremated don't just disappear? Could their souls, like the ones I saw in the vision, still be wandering, still in need of something I couldn't understand? I felt a deep sense of confusion. On the one hand, my rational mind told me it was impossible, that I was imagining things, that death was final. But my heart, something deep inside me, told me that there was more. When I tried to speak to Arjun about it, I was met with resistance. "You can't seriously believe in that stuff, Amit," he said, shaking his head as if the very idea was laughable. "You're a man of reason. This is all just in your head." I couldn't blame him for thinking that. After all, I had always been the same. But what I had seen, what I had felt, it wasn't something that could be dismissed so easily. The visions haunted me, even in the quiet moments, in the spaces where I thought I could escape from it all. Priya, on the other hand, was different. She didn't question me. She didn't dismiss my experience. Instead, she supported me, but in a way that felt more like pity than understanding. "It's okay," she told me one night as we sat in the living room, the glow of the television casting soft shadows across the room. "If you're struggling with your beliefs, you don't have to have all the answers right now. Just take it one step at a time. We'll figure it out together." Her words were comforting, but they only added to my confusion. It wasn't that I didn't want to believe, it was that I didn't know how to believe. I had spent so many years being sure that death was final, that the soul was just a concept people clung to out of fear or ignorance. Now the very thing I had dismissed was staring me in the face, and I didn't know how to respond. I felt torn between my wife's gentle faith and the harsh logic I had lived by for so long. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see the faces of the souls I had witnessed. Every time I spoke to Priya, I could hear her belief in an afterlife, in reincarnation. But I wasn't ready to fully embrace it yet. There was also my mother, Gita. She had always talked about the soul's journey, how it was endless, how we are reborn time and time again. She had always told me that the body was just a shell, that the soul lived on. I had never taken her seriously, but now everything she said seemed to make sense in a way I couldn't deny. I felt like I was living in two worlds, the world I had known, grounded in logic and skepticism, and the world that had been opened to me through that experience, a world that felt true but was so unfamiliar. It was hard to reconcile these two realities, especially with the people I loved most. My family was divided, each of them reacting to my inner turmoil in their own way. Priya wanted to help, but she didn't fully understand. Arjun dismissed it as a passing phase. And my mother, while understanding, spoke in a way that felt like she was waiting for me to come around to her way of thinking. The more I thought about it, the more I felt like I was standing at a crossroads. On one side was the world I had known, with all its answers, its safety. On the other side was something deeper, more mysterious, something I couldn't yet grasp but knew somehow I was being called to explore. The questions kept piling up. What happens after we die? Do we truly just vanish into nothingness, or is there something more? And what about those who are cremated? Are their souls lost forever, or do they still find a way to move on? I couldn't ignore it anymore. The experience had shattered my certainty, and now I had to figure out what to do with the pieces. The days blurred into one another. I was no longer just going through the motions of life. I was actively searching, questioning, trying to make sense of what had happened. The experience of the car accident, of floating in that dark void and encountering the presence of something beyond, refused to leave my mind. I couldn't escape it. Every time I tried to return to my old way of thinking, to cling to the beliefs I had held for years, it felt like the truth I had glimpsed was pushing back against me, forcing me to face what I had denied. I didn't know who to turn to. Arjun's skepticism only made me feel isolated, and Priya's gentle faith didn't provide the clarity I needed. And so, in the dead of night, when the world around me was silent, I sought something else, something I had never considered before. I had heard of a man in the city, Dr. Patel, a psychiatrist known for his unconventional approach to healing. Some said he was more than a doctor, that he had an understanding of the mind that reached beyond science. Desperate for answers, I decided to meet with him. Our first meeting was strange. I walked into his office, unsure of what to expect. Dr. Patel was an older man, soft-spoken, but with an intensity in his eyes that made me feel like he could see straight through me. He didn't ask the usual questions about my childhood or my family. Instead, he sat me down and said, "Tell me about your experience." I was hesitant at first. How could I explain something that didn't make sense to me? But there was something about Dr. Patel that put me at ease. His quiet, knowing demeanor made me feel like he wouldn't judge me no matter what I said. I began recounting everything, the floating in darkness, the overwhelming presence, the visions of the souls, the voice telling me that what I believed wasn't true. As I spoke, Dr. Patel listened intently, his eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, he was silent for a moment as if weighing my words. Finally, he spoke. "You experienced something that many others have," he said. "Something beyond the physical realm. What you saw, what you felt, it's real. The question is, how do you understand it?" I stared at him in disbelief. How could he say that? I had spent my entire life dismissing such experiences as hallucinations, as the products of an overactive mind. But here was Dr. Patel, a man of science, telling me that what I had experienced was real. He wasn't mocking me. He wasn't telling me it was all in my head. Instead, he seemed to be confirming the very thing I had been afraid to believe. "The souls you saw," he continued, "they're not lost. They're not gone. What you experienced was a glimpse into something deeper. You've been given a window into the spiritual reality that we often can't see, but that doesn't make it any less real." I felt a wave of emotion wash over me, relief, confusion, and fear all tangled together. For For the first time since the accident, someone was telling me that my experience wasn't just a figment of my imagination. But that raised a new question. What now? Dr. Patel continued. What you need to understand is that the soul doesn't die with the body. Whether the body is cremated or buried, the soul moves on. The problem is, it's not always a smooth journey. Sometimes, souls are caught in a place between worlds, unable to move forward. Your experience was not just a vision, Amit. It was a glimpse into the struggles of those souls. They need help to move on. Those words hit me harder than anything else. Help to move on, I echoed. What do you mean? Dr. Patel leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. There are many who believe that the soul's journey isn't just about moving on. It's about understanding what comes next. Some souls, those who are cremated, may struggle with the transition, with the fear of what comes after. They need guidance. They need someone to help them cross over. His words left me breathless. The vision I had seen, the souls, were they stuck? Were they waiting for someone to guide them, to show them the way forward? I left Dr. Patel's office that day with more questions than answers, but I also felt a strange sense of purpose. He had shown me something that I couldn't ignore, something that pulled me deeper into the mystery of life and death. And for the first time, I felt like I was on the edge of understanding something far greater than anything I had ever known. I still didn't know how to process what I had seen or what I had heard, but there was no turning back now. I had been given a glimpse into a world beyond my understanding, and now I had to figure out how to make sense of it. In the days that followed my meeting with Dr. Patel, everything felt different. I was no longer the same man I had been before the accident. The questions that had been swirling in my mind began to take shape, but with them came an overwhelming sense of isolation. The more I tried to talk about my experience, the more I realized just how much of a gulf had formed between me and the people around me. Priya noticed the shift almost immediately. She was concerned, but she didn't know how to help me. I could see it in her eyes. She wanted to understand, but I was no longer the man she had married. I could see her reaching out to me, trying to make sense of my internal chaos, but every time she asked, "Amit, what's going on? You're not yourself," I found myself retreating even further. I wasn't sure how to explain it to her. How could I put into words the weight of what I had seen? The vision of the souls, the sense that there was more to this life than I had ever imagined. How could I tell her that I was now questioning everything I had believed in? One evening, as we sat down to dinner, Priya tried again. "Amit, you're scaring me," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "This isn't like you. You've always been so sure of yourself. What happened to you?" I looked at her, her eyes filled with love and concern, but I felt the distance between us growing wider. "I don't know how to explain it," I said, my voice raw. "I've seen things. I've felt things, Priya. Things that don't make sense. Things that make me question everything we've believed." She blinked, trying to process my words. "What kind of things? You mean what you saw after the accident?" I nodded. "Yes, it was like I was shown something beyond this world, and it's made me rethink everything. What happens after we die? What happens to the soul? The souls of those who are cremated, they're not gone, Priya. I know that now. They're just waiting. They need help to move on." Priya stared at me, her face a mix of confusion and fear. She had always believed in the afterlife, but she didn't understand what I was saying. Her faith was rooted in the belief that the soul was eternal, that it would always find its way home. But what I was describing was more complex, more mysterious. "Amit, I don't know what to say," she whispered. "I believe in the afterlife, but this is different. You're saying they're stuck, that they need help? I don't understand. What are you going to do?" I didn't have an answer. How could I? I had only just begun to process what I had experienced, and now I was being asked to make sense of it in a way that could be shared with her, with anyone. It wasn't that I wanted to push her away, but it felt like I was walking a path that was so foreign to everyone around me, including her. Then there was Arjun. My younger brother, the one who had always been my partner in skepticism, was the hardest to talk to. I tried once, during one of our late-night conversations, to explain what I had seen. "Arjun, I need you to hear me out." I said, "What I saw wasn't just a dream or a hallucination. I know it sounds crazy, but I saw souls, people who are stuck, waiting. I saw them in the afterlife, struggling. He scoffed, shaking his head. Amit, come on. You really believe this stuff? You're telling me you saw souls? That's just... I don't even know what to say. His reaction stung, more than I expected. Arjun had always been the one who encouraged me to stay grounded, to avoid falling into anything that couldn't be explained. But this wasn't something I could explain. Not to him, not to anyone. I could feel the gap widening between us, the bond of shared disbelief crumbling under the weight of what I knew now. I know it's hard to understand, I said quietly, but I need you to at least try to consider it. What if we're missing something? What if death isn't the end? What if those who are cremated, their souls don't just disappear? Arjun didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stared at me, his face unreadable. I can't do this, Amit. I can't just start believing in things that don't make sense. I need you to stop before this goes too far. That was the moment I realized how truly alone I felt. My family, my closest companions, didn't understand. Priya, while loving and supportive, couldn't fully grasp what I had experienced. Arjun, the one who had always stood beside me in disbelief, now saw me as someone who had lost his grip on reality. It felt like the more I shared, the further I was pushed away from the people who mattered most. And yet, despite their reactions, I couldn't stop. I couldn't ignore what I had seen. I couldn't pretend that everything I had believed was still true. Deep inside, I knew there was something more. The souls I had seen, the guidance I felt was necessary, those were the things I had to follow, no matter the cost. As the weeks passed, my internal struggle intensified. What I had seen, what I knew to be true now, had started to bleed into every aspect of my life. The question of what happens to souls after death was no longer something I could dismiss as irrelevant. It consumed me, and the weight of it began to affect everything: my relationships, my work, and my sense of self. I found myself increasingly unable to focus on anything other than the journey I was on. At work, I would zone out during meetings, lost in thought, wondering about the souls I had seen. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been given a mission, a calling to help these souls find peace. But I didn't know how to help them, or even if it was possible. Priya had noticed the change in me as well. She had tried to talk to me about it, but every time she did, I found myself pushing her away. I didn't know how to explain this growing sense of responsibility that had overtaken me, nor could I put into words the overwhelming urge to understand what was happening to the souls who had been cremated. I needed answers, but I couldn't even find the words to articulate the questions. Meanwhile, Arjun's resistance grew stronger. He had always been the voice of reason in my life, but now his disbelief seemed like a wall between us. I could feel his judgment in the way he looked at me, and each time I tried to explain, it felt like I was only pushing him further away. His words haunted me. Stop before this goes too far. What if I was? What if I had already gone too far? Then there was another complication. A woman named Meera reached out to me. She was a former colleague, someone I had known briefly years ago. She had heard about my near-death experience through a mutual acquaintance and was eager to talk. I wasn't sure why, but something about her invitation piqued my curiosity. We met in a quiet cafe one afternoon. Meera wasn't like anyone I had encountered before. She was calm, almost unnervingly so, and when she spoke, there was a depth to her words that made me feel as though she understood things I couldn't even put into thoughts. She didn't ask about the accident or my near-death experience right away. Instead, she started talking about her own journey. She explained that she had once been deeply involved in the study of life after death, the soul's journey, and the connection between this life and the next. She spoke of a spiritual practice that helped guide lost souls, particularly those who had died in violent or traumatic ways, and those whose bodies had been cremated. Her words struck me like a chord I didn't know existed. You see, she said softly, there are souls trapped in limbo, souls who haven't found peace. The souls of the cremated ones, in particular, are the ones who struggle the most because their bodies have been burned, and that act seems to sever the connection they once had with this world. They're lost, drifting, until someone like you comes along. Her words echoed Dr. Patel's advice, but with a new layer of meaning. She wasn't just talking about the souls I had seen. She was talking about something deeper, something that required active intervention. I wasn't sure if I believed in her spiritual practices or if this was just another theory, but what she said aligned with everything I had felt since the accident. "I don't know what to do with this," I admitted, my voice heavy with frustration. "I can't even help myself, let alone guide these souls." Meera leaned forward, her eyes steady on mine. "That's where the true challenge lies. You have to be willing to step beyond your own fears, beyond your own doubts, and reach out to help. The souls need someone who understands their struggle, and sometimes they need someone who has been to the other side to guide them back." I wasn't sure if I was ready for this. I didn't know if I could be the one to help these lost souls find peace. But Meera's words had planted a seed of possibility in my mind. What if this was the answer? What if, in helping them, I could find the peace I was so desperately seeking? What if my experience had not only been a warning, but also a calling? I was torn, unsure of whether to accept Meera's proposition or continue on the path I had already started. But I couldn't ignore the pull I felt toward this new mission. Helping the souls felt like the only way forward, even if it meant facing even more personal sacrifice. I had to decide whether to embrace this new purpose, even if it meant venturing into unknown and uncomfortable spiritual territory, or to turn my back on it and continue living a life bound by old beliefs that no longer made sense. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself slipping deeper into a world that felt both foreign and inevitable. Every conversation with Priya felt strained. Every moment spent with Arjun felt like an attempt to patch a broken bridge. And yet, despite the growing distance between us, there was an undeniable sense of urgency driving me forward. I had to help these souls, even if it cost me everything. Priya had been patient, but I could see her frustration building. She had been my rock, my partner for so long. We had built a life together, based on shared beliefs and shared dreams. Now it felt like I was drifting away from her, like I was becoming a stranger in my own home. She could see the changes in me, but she didn't understand them. And no matter how hard I tried to explain, it was like I was speaking a language she didn't know. One evening, as I sat on the edge of our bed, staring at the floor, Priya's voice broke through the silence. "Amit, I don't know who you are anymore," she said, her voice trembling. "You're not the man I married. You're obsessed with these souls, with what happened to you after the accident. You're shutting me out." I looked up, my heart heavy with guilt. "I'm not trying to shut you out, Priya. This is something I have to do. I can't explain it, but it's like I've been given this responsibility. These souls, especially the ones who have been cremated, they need help, and I think I'm supposed to be the one to help them." She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I get that something happened to you, but this is crazy, Amit. You're talking about souls, about things no one can see, no one understands. You're losing yourself, and I'm afraid you're losing us." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I wasn't just losing myself, I was losing her too. It felt like I was standing at a crossroads, torn between the calling I felt in my heart and the woman who had shared my life for so many years. I wanted to reassure her, to make her understand, but I couldn't find the words. "I don't know how to make you see it, Priya," I said softly. "But I can't ignore what I've seen. These souls are lost, and they need someone to help them. They need someone who understands. I think I'm that person." Priya fell silent, her face a mixture of disbelief and sorrow. "I don't know if I can keep going down this path with you, Amit. I don't know if I can keep supporting you when I don't understand what's happening. But I can't keep pretending that everything's okay when I feel like I'm losing you." Her words stung, but they were true. The distance between us was growing too wide to bridge with words alone. I had changed, and I didn't know if I could ever be the same person I had been for her. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore what I felt was my purpose. I had to help these souls, even if it meant losing everything I once held dear. And then there was Arjun. He hadn't spoken to me in weeks, his voice growing colder every time we crossed paths. It was as if he saw me as a stranger, a man who had lost touch with everything they had once believed in. He didn't understand my obsession, my need to help the souls, and the more I tried to explain it, the more he shut me out. One evening, I visited him at his apartment, desperate for a conversation. He was sitting on the couch, watching a game, but when he saw me enter, he muted the TV and looked at me with a mixture of resignation and anger. "Amit, I don't know what's going on with you, but this isn't you. You're not thinking clearly," he said, his voice tight. "You're talking about souls, about things you can't see. You can't base your life on that. This is all just in your head." I sat down across from him, my hands trembling as I tried to find the words. "Arjun, I've seen things. I've felt things. I know what I'm saying sounds crazy, but I've seen souls that are lost, and I think I'm supposed to help them." He laughed bitterly. "Amit, you've lost it. This isn't some spiritual calling. This is you running away from reality. You're grasping at straws, and it's dangerous. You can't go on like this. You need to snap out of it before you ruin your life." His words cut deep. They weren't just dismissive. They were a rejection of everything I had come to believe. I had always looked to Arjun for support, for guidance, but now it felt like I was on my own. I stood up, my fists clenched. "I don't know how to make you understand, Arjun, but I'm not going to back down. I know what I've seen and I can't ignore it. If you can't support me, then I don't know what else to say." Without waiting for a response, I turned and walked out of his apartment, the weight of his rejection pressing heavily on my chest. In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that the stakes were getting higher. My journey had always felt personal, but now it seemed like I was being pulled into something much larger than myself. The sense of responsibility had grown to an overwhelming degree, and every day it felt like I was being tested, emotionally, spiritually, and mentally. Priya and I barely spoke anymore. Our house, once a place of warmth and love, had become a cold and silent space. I could feel the distance between us, the weight of her silence pressing down on me. It wasn't just her anger that hurt. It was the fact that I had no way of making her understand. I had tried so hard to explain, but nothing seemed to reach her. I was on a path I couldn't turn away from, and I knew that if she couldn't follow me, then the future we had imagined together might not exist anymore. Arjun's rejection still stung, but I couldn't let it derail me. The more he distanced himself, the more determined I became to prove him wrong. But as I dove deeper into my quest, something strange started happening. There were moments, fleeting and surreal, when I felt an uncanny presence beside me, as though someone or something was watching me. It was unsettling, to say the least. One night, after a long, fruitless conversation with Priya about our relationship and my spiritual journey, I decided to take a walk. I needed to clear my mind, to make sense of everything that was happening. As I wandered through the quiet streets of our neighborhood, I felt a sudden chill in the air. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I walked past an old, dilapidated church near the edge of the block. I had seen it 1,000 times before, but that night it felt different. It almost seemed to beckon me, drawing me in. I hesitated at first, but something inside urged me to step closer. The door creaked open with a groan as I pushed it, and I stepped inside. The church was empty, the air heavy with dust and silence. But as I walked down the narrow aisle, I felt a strange energy, as if the very walls were alive with unseen forces. I made my way to the altar, where a large, weathered crucifix hung above. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows on the floor. I knelt before the altar, my heart racing as the emotions inside me boiled over. "God, I don't know what's happening to me," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do. But if you're out there, please show me. Show me how to help them. Show me how to help these souls." As I finished my prayer, something incredible happened. The room seemed to shift, the air growing warmer. For a brief moment, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in months. It was like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders, and the overwhelming confusion and doubt that had clouded my mind began to clear. But then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the peace was gone. A voice, faint but clear, echoed in my mind. It was soft, like a whisper on the wind, but it carried with it an undeniable sense of urgency. "You are not alone." The words sent a chill down my spine, and I stood up quickly, looking around the empty church. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt a rush of adrenaline. Had I imagined it? Was it my mind playing tricks on me? No. I knew what I had heard. I wasn't alone. There was something else out there. someone else who was guiding me, watching over me. And that's when I understood this journey wasn't just about me. It wasn't just about my search for truth or my desire to help the lost souls. There was a deeper purpose, a higher power involved. I had been chosen for something greater than I had ever imagined. As I left the church that night, a sense of clarity washed over me. The tension between my old life and this new, spiritual path still lingered, but I felt more certain than ever that I was on the right track. The souls needed me, and now, more than ever, I had to believe that God was with me on this journey. The next few days were a blur of confusion and strange clarity. I still couldn't quite grasp the full scope of what had happened in the church, but I knew I couldn't ignore it. My encounter with that voice, that feeling of peace, had shifted something inside of me. It was as if I had been given a glimpse into a larger reality, a world I couldn't yet fully understand, but one I knew was real. Priya noticed the change in me. It wasn't just the absence of her anger or the silence that now filled our home. There was something else, a stillness in me that had replaced the frantic, confused energy I had been carrying for so long. But she didn't know how to react to it. I still didn't know how to explain it. One night, as we sat at the dinner table, she broke the silence. "Amit," she began, her voice soft but serious. "I don't understand what's happening. I don't know where you are anymore. You say you've seen things, felt things, but it's like you're becoming someone else." I looked up at her, my heart heavy. I had spent so much time trying to convince her that I wasn't losing myself, but the truth was, I was. In some ways, I had already left the life we had built. I had no choice. What I had seen, what I had felt, it was more real than anything I had ever known. "Priya," I said quietly, "I can't go back. I can't pretend I haven't experienced what I have. I know it's hard to understand, but what I'm doing, it's bigger than us." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of hurt and fear. "Bigger than us?" she repeated softly. "Amit, I don't know if I can follow you on this path. You're not the man I married. You're someone else now." Her words hit me like a punch. I had known this was coming, but hearing her say it out loud was devastating. I loved her. I wanted to stay with her. But how could I when I was being pulled in a direction I couldn't fully explain? It was like I had to choose between the life I had with her and the purpose that was calling me. I tried to hold back tears, but the weight of it all was too much. "I don't know how to make you understand, Priya, but it's who I am now. I can't ignore it. I need to help them, these souls. I have to do this." For a long moment, Priya didn't speak. She just stared at me, her face unreadable. Then, finally, she stood up and walked out of the room, leaving me alone at the table. The loneliness that followed her departure was overwhelming. It was as though, in one instant, I had lost both my wife and my sense of normalcy. But as much as the loss hurt, something inside me knew I had no choice but to continue. I had to fulfill this purpose. The souls needed me. The next few days brought another unexpected development. Meera reached out again, this time with urgency in her tone. She told me that there had been a new breakthrough in her studies, something that could help me in my quest to understand what had happened to the cremated souls. She asked me to meet her at a local park, and despite everything that had been happening in my personal life, I knew I had to go. When I arrived, she was waiting under the shade of a large tree. There was a fire in her eyes, a kind of intensity that made me both nervous and curious. As I sat down beside her, she wasted no time. "Amit, I've been researching this for years. The souls of the cremated ones, they're not lost in the way we thought. They're trapped in a state of unrest, caught between the world of the living and the afterlife, and they can't move on until someone helps them." I listened intently as she spoke, my mind racing. I had always thought that the souls were lost because of the burning of their bodies, but Meera's words painted a new picture, one that felt both terrifying and hopeful. "But what can we do to help them?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Meera's gaze softened. "There's a way, a ritual of sorts. It's ancient, rooted in spiritual traditions that have been forgotten over time. But it requires a person who has crossed over themselves, a person who has seen the other side and can guide the lost souls back." I stared at her in disbelief. "A ritual? And you think I can do it?" She nodded. "Yes, you've already been touched by the other side. Your near-death experience has given you the ability to see things others can't. You are the bridge they need." The weight of her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I had known deep down that my experience had been more than just an accident. It was a turning point, a moment that had set me on a path I couldn't avoid. But now, I was being told that I had a power I had never fully understood. I didn't know what to make of it, but a part of me knew that I couldn't back away from this. If this was the key to helping the souls, then I had to embrace it. Even if it meant facing the unknown, even if it meant losing more of myself along the way. The following weeks felt like a whirlwind, a blur of spiritual conflict, personal isolation, and mounting pressure. Each day I spent with Priya felt like a slow, painful unraveling of the life I had known. Our conversations, once filled with laughter and shared dreams, now felt hollow, like we were strangers trying to connect across an insurmountable divide. I couldn't blame her. She didn't understand what I was going through. How could she? What had happened to me wasn't something she could just accept or explain away. I could see it in her eyes, the hurt, the fear, the disbelief. She had tried for so long to be supportive, but the person I was becoming was someone she no longer recognized. We fought more often now. Every time we talked about my spiritual journey, it seemed to deepen the rift between us. She couldn't see why I couldn't just leave the past behind. She couldn't understand why I had to pursue this mission with such urgency. One night, after an argument that had escalated to the point where both of us were exhausted and emotionally spent, I stood in the middle of our living room, my heart heavy with the weight of the situation. "Priya," I said softly, trying to control the tremor in my voice, "I don't know how to make you see this, but I can't stop. These souls, these people who have been cremated, they need me. I have to do this." Her face was a mixture of frustration and sadness, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "Amit," she whispered, her voice shaking, "I don't know who you are anymore. You're not the man I married." Those words struck me with more force than I could have anticipated. I felt as if the ground had been ripped out from under me. This wasn't just a spiritual crisis anymore. It was a relationship crisis, a crisis of identity. I had always believed that my purpose was to help people, to make a difference in the world, but this journey was tearing everything apart. I had sacrificed so much of myself already, and now I was standing at a crossroads. I couldn't go back, but could I continue down this path knowing the cost? As if to add more weight to the already crushing burden, I received a message from Meera that evening. She had found the ritual, the one that could help the souls of the cremated ones find peace and move on. She wanted to meet urgently. The moment I saw the message, I knew this was the turning point I had been waiting for. Everything had led up to this moment. If I performed this ritual, it would change everything. I could help these lost souls find peace, but at what cost? I sat down on the edge of the couch, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was unfolding. The pressure of the world felt like it was pressing down on me, suffocating me with the weight of responsibility. I knew I couldn't ignore this opportunity, but the thought of losing Priya, losing the life we had built together, was too much to bear. I sent a quick response to Meera, agreeing to meet her the next day. But as I lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, the reality of what I was about to do sank in. If I went through with this ritual, I would be stepping into a new chapter of my life, one that would likely leave me estranged from everything and everyone I once held dear. I could feel the conflict within me growing. On one side, the calling to help the souls, to fulfill this purpose that had been thrust upon me. On the other, the fear of losing the only connection to the life I had known. I couldn't be the man Priya needed, and I couldn't be the man I used to be. I was caught between two worlds, neither of which I could fully embrace. I closed my eyes, trying to silence the storm raging inside me. But I knew that when I woke up, I would have to make a choice that would define the rest of my life. The day I met Meera at the park was one of the most tense and uncertain days of my life. Priya and I had barely spoken in days, and every word between us felt like it could be the final thread that tore our connection apart. I had tried to explain, but the more I spoke about my mission, the further she seemed to pull away. When I arrived at the park, Meera was waiting for me. Her face was calm, But there was a weight to her expression that told me this was no ordinary meeting. As we sat down on a bench under the shade of a large tree, I could feel the tension between us, the unspoken acknowledgement of the gravity of what I was about to undertake. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice quiet but urgent. She was asking not just about the ritual, but about everything. My faith, my choice to help these souls, the cost of what I was about to do. "I don't know," I replied honestly, running a hand through my hair. "I don't know if I'll ever be ready, but I know I have to do this." Meera nodded, her eyes sympathetic. "This is a huge step, Amit. What you're about to do will change everything. It's not just about the souls, it's about you. You're not going to be the same person when this is over, and you may lose more than you expect." Her words were a stark reminder of the truth I was avoiding. Everything had already changed. Priya was slipping away, and I was too consumed by my mission to stop it. But even more than that, I could feel something shifting within me, something deep and inexplicable that told me this path would take me somewhere I couldn't predict. We spent the next hour discussing the details of the ritual. Meera explained that it would require both spiritual strength and the willingness to face unimaginable fear. The souls of the cremated were in a limbo, trapped between life and death, unable to move forward because their bodies had been reduced to ashes. It was the ritual that would guide them, help them pass into peace. But it would be difficult. It would require me to reach deep within myself and draw on the powers I had barely begun to understand. I felt the weight of the responsibility pressing down on me with every word she said. This wasn't just about helping the souls anymore. It was about me embracing my new identity, shedding the man I had once been. It was about losing myself in the process of becoming something greater. Later that evening, as I sat alone in my room, I thought about everything I had lost. Priya, the life we had built together, the comfort of knowing who I was and where I belonged. And now, I was about to walk away from it all, leaving everything familiar behind in order to step into the unknown. I walked into the living room, where Priya was sitting silently on the couch, her eyes red from crying. The silence between us was thick with unspoken words. I knew I couldn't ignore her anymore. I had to face her, even if it meant that our relationship would be torn apart for good. "Priya," I said softly, my voice trembling, "I need to tell you something." She looked up, her face a mixture of sorrow and resignation. "What more is there to say, Amit? You've already made your choice. You're not the man I married." I shook my head, feeling the sharp sting of her words. "No, I'm not. But I'm not the man I used to be either. This journey is bigger than me, bigger than us. I have to do this for the souls that need me. I can't walk away from this, Priya. I don't know how to explain it to you, but this is my purpose." Her eyes searched mine, as if looking for some trace of the man she had loved. "I don't understand, Amit. I can't follow you on this path. I can't live in a world where you're not the same person, where we're not the same." I felt the pain of her words pierce deep into my heart, but I knew that no matter how much I loved her, I couldn't turn away from this purpose. The souls needed me, and I had to follow this path. With a heavy heart, I turned away from her, knowing that our paths had diverged irreparably. There was no turning back now. The decision had been made. I sent Meera a message later that night, telling her I was ready. The next day I would perform the ritual. I could feel the weight of what was to come, but there was also a quiet resolve within me, a certainty that this was what I was meant to do. The time had come. The day of the ritual arrived, and I could feel the tension in my entire body. It was as though the world had narrowed down to this single moment. The air felt heavy, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. Everything in me screamed to turn back, to hold on to the life I had known, to hold on to the relationship with Priya, even though I knew it was already slipping through my fingers. Meera and I met early in the morning, just as the first light of dawn was beginning to break through the horizon. She had instructed me to come prepared, mentally and spiritually. We were meeting at a secluded temple on the outskirts of the city, an old, crumbling structure that had once been a place of worship, but now stood forgotten, abandoned, much like the souls we were about to attempt to help. As I walked toward the temple, the quiet of the morning seemed almost too peaceful. It felt like the calm before a storm. Meera was already there, standing by the altar, her expression unreadable. The ritual wasn't going to be easy. I had no illusions about that. But there was something in her eyes that told me we were about to do something far bigger than we had anticipated. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice steady but laden with the weight of the moment. I took a deep breath and nodded. There was no going back now. The ritual was simple in theory, but complex in execution. We began by lighting incense and offering prayers to the spirits. Meera guided me through the steps, her voice calm and reassuring as she led me to focus on the souls we were about to reach. She told me to think of them, to imagine them trapped in the space between life and death, lost and unable to move on. The goal was to help them find peace, to release them from the limbo they had been in for so long. As I closed my eyes, I tried to concentrate, but the weight of the task was almost suffocating. I could feel the presence of something, someone, watching, waiting. The air around me seemed to grow colder, as though I were no longer in the world I had known, but in another realm entirely. Then, without warning, the world around me seemed to change. I was no longer standing in the temple. I was somewhere else, a place that felt both familiar and foreign. It was as if I had crossed a threshold into another reality. I saw them, hundreds, thousands of souls, their faces contorted with fear and longing, their bodies flickering in and out of existence. They were the cremated ones, their forms no longer bound by flesh, but still trapped in the cycle of suffering, unable to move on to the afterlife. I felt their desperation, their cries echoing in my mind, and I knew that it was up to me to set them free. The fear that had gripped me before seemed to vanish as I stepped forward, reaching out with my hands. The energy around me was pulsating with life, with movement, and I felt a surge of power, an overwhelming sense of connection to something far greater than myself. I began to speak, not in my own language, but in something ancient, something that seemed to come from deep within my soul. The words I spoke felt unfamiliar, but they held power, power to break the chains that bound these souls. As I spoke, the souls began to shift, their forms flickering with light, their eyes starting to show signs of peace. But then, something went wrong. I felt a sharp pain in my chest, as if something were pulling me in two directions. The energy around me became chaotic, swirling in a frenzy as if fighting against my attempts to help the souls. I gasped for breath, my body shaking as I struggled to stay grounded. A voice, deep and cold, whispered in my ear, "You cannot save them all. Some souls are meant to remain lost." The words sent a wave of terror through me. What if I was wrong? What if I wasn't supposed to help them? But as the pain intensified, something inside me snapped. The doubt, the fear, it all melted away, replaced by a fierce determination. I had come this far. I couldn't stop now. With everything I had, I focused all my energy on the ritual, pushing through the pain, pushing through the resistance. And then, as if the universe itself had opened up, a surge of light washed over me. The souls around me began to vanish, their faces softening, their cries fading into peace. It was as though a veil had been lifted, and they were finally free. But just as I thought it was over, I saw her, the figure that had been haunting me, the one whose voice had guided me. It was the woman from my near-death experience, the one who had told me about the souls in limbo. She appeared before me, her face serene, her eyes full of understanding. "You have done well," she said softly. "You have helped them find peace. But remember, this is only the beginning of your journey. You have been called to lead others, to help them find their way." I felt an overwhelming sense of peace wash over me, and the world around me began to fade. The ritual was complete. The souls had found rest. But I knew that this was not the end. This was only the beginning of the path I had been set on. The moment the ritual concluded, I collapsed to the ground, exhausted both physically and spiritually. The light that had enveloped me faded, and I was back in the temple, on my knees, gasping for air. The weight of the experience lingered around me like a thick fog, and for a moment I wasn't sure if I was still dreaming. The ground beneath me felt solid again, but the energy I had felt moments before seemed to pulse through my veins. Meera rushed to my side, her eyes wide with concern. "Amit, are you okay?" Her voice trembled, as if she wasn't sure if she should be worried about my well-being or the outcome of the ritual itself. I looked at her, still trying to gather myself. I think it worked, I said, my voice hoarse. I think the souls are at peace. There was a long silence as she processed what I had just said. Then slowly, a smile spread across her face, one of quiet relief, but also of something deeper. You did it, she whispered. You really did it. But as the moment of triumph settled into my bones, I realized something else. The fear, the anxiety, the confusion I had carried with me for so long hadn't vanished. In fact, it had only transformed into something new. I had saved the souls, but what about my own? I stood up shakily, feeling the weight of my decision bearing down on me. Everything had changed. Priya was no longer the woman I had once known, and I was no longer the man she had married. My life had split in two, the man I had been and the man I was becoming. In the days that followed, I returned to the apartment, but it no longer felt like home. Priya and I barely spoke. The space between us felt like an insurmountable chasm, and every word I spoke to her seemed to fall flat. She had been right. I wasn't the same person. The choice I had made, the path I had walked, had left me a different man. I couldn't return to the comfort of my old life. Not now. There was a pull within me now, a pull towards something greater than anything I had ever known. I felt it every day, deep in my soul, a longing to help more people, to guide them toward peace. But still, I missed Priya. I missed the woman I had married, the love we had shared. I missed the life I had once taken for granted. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. I couldn't undo what had been done. I had stepped into the unknown, and now I had to embrace the journey. As the days passed, I began to feel a peace that I had never known before. It wasn't the peace I had expected. This wasn't the resolution I had imagined, but it was a peace that came from a deeper understanding of my purpose. A peace that came from knowing that I had made the right choice, even if it had cost me everything. Priya and I never reconciled. In the end, we both knew that our paths had diverged too much to ever come back together. But I no longer carried the burden of regret. I knew that I had to walk this path, even if it meant walking alone. And as I moved forward, helping others to find peace, to connect with the souls of those who had passed, I realized something profound. This journey had not just been about saving others. It had been about saving myself. Through the souls I helped, I had found my own redemption. I still think about Priya sometimes. I wonder what she's doing, if she's found happiness in her own way. But I also know that the person I am now is not the same person I was when we met. I have embraced the calling, and I know that the work I do now is my true purpose. If there's one thing I have learned, it's this. Sometimes the path to peace and redemption is not easy. It is not without sacrifice, but it is worth it, for the souls we help and for our own souls too. If you've been moved by this story, I invite you to reflect on your own journey. Have you been called to a purpose greater than yourself? Have you too faced the tension between who you were and who you are becoming? Subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments. Together, we can support one another on this path of transformation.